Good evening, everybody. Kyle with Andrew Hilton here. Welcome to, I think our 10th, possibly, maybe not, wine tasting of the year. I apologize a little bit for us being, 3-4 minutes late here. My terrible earbuds, which if you're a regular viewer, you'll know have been a bit of a fiasco since the start, finally actually died. So now we're doing this with gas station knockoff Apple AirPods that Mike actually had to run and grab from a gas station about 5 minutes ago because the actual earpiece we had just died straight out at the worst possible time. This is at least my favorite wine tasting that we've done so far. For those of you who don't know, this past July, I went to California with my wife because she had a psychology conference, and I went along, A, to drink, and B, to actually do some work and visit some of the wineries that we work with. I visited Brock Cellars, and I visited Donkey and Goat, and I visited some really particularly wonderful wineries, but the winery I spent the most time with by far was at Stirm, hanging out and drinking wine and being giant Riesling nerds with winemaker Ryan Strim, who is joining us this evening, which I'm really grateful for. Good evening, Ryan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm pretty stoked to share a little bit with everyone who's listening, and I'm hoping mostly Lethbridge, Alberta, right?
Yep. There are some people in some of the outlying communities, but nobody's more than like half an hour from Lethbridge, as far as I know.
Sweet.
We're going to start with the Companion Wine Company. So we have two different projects here, quite separated. I want you to break it down for the folks at home, the difference between the Companion Wine cans and the Stirm Wine bottles.
Yeah, so Companion, as you can see, is we just have these two that we're going to try today, but it's a canned wine company that I started with a couple of partners. One of the partners is a graphic designer, and one's a sales guy. And we also work with a few other winemakers, and actually both the wines that we're trying today were made by two of our companion winemakers, Gina Gwigny, sorry, I butchered her name every time. I was told it's Junie, but it's spelled like Gwigny, and Scott Schultz from Jolie Lade.
Okay.
So basically, the idea with the canned wine project is just to make it a little bit more fun, and I thought it would be cool to work with a few other winemakers to get them to each do a cuvee for the company, like me included. So it's just a way for all, a small can company to have a lot more diversity than it would normally be. And instead of just me making all the wines, it's just a total mishmash of styles, and just all ends up in a can and under the same brand, basically. So it's really a good way for people to just see a few different California winemakers, really, and have the accessibility of being able to have it in a can at an affordable price.
And different winemakers, including yourself. You're the winemaker behind the rosé that we have right now in a can.
Yeah, exactly. I make rosé and Riesling in a can. So, and then we worked with Graham Titomer in the past, who made a Gruner Veltliner that was awesome.
We actually have a little of that Gruner still.
Oh, great.
We bought the last flat or two, I think, from Eric, because that Gruner was absolutely tremendous. So
for sure.
Where are we starting? Are we starting with the Malvasia, or are we starting with the Savvy B?
I put a little Malvasia in my glass, and it's totally not necessary to actually pour the wine in a glass. I honestly prefer just drinking it out of the can.
I'm down for that.
It's just kind of how it was made to be. It's just it's a vessel that's ready to drink. You don't need any fancy tools, and that's what's pretty sweet about the can thing is the portability aspect.
I'm a bougie fellow, so I'm going to have it out of a glass. But let's talk about Malvasia just in general terms. I mean, it's grown in a lot of places along the Mediterranean coast. I can think of some examples in Italy. I can think of quite a few examples in Spain. It can be very highly aromatic, and because it's grown in such hot climates, it tends to be reasonably high acid. Tell us about Malvasia to you and to this project.
So, I mean, since I didn't make it, there's only so much feedback I can give you directly on this wine.
And I apologize for that aspect of it. But to your credit, I mean, everything else we wanted to do from Stirm was basically sold out when we tried to do this event. Like, we always do kind of 3 to 4 wines, and we have to hit a price point of kind of $80 Canadian, which the U.S. exchange rate is not helping us with that right now with this. But
Dude, I'm sure.
we, A, all of your wines are awesome enough to be sold out all the time, and B, yeah, the exchange rate's just murdering us. So we did kind of have to go with the companion stuff just to make this work.
Yeah, totally. No problem at all. But yeah, basically, I do know about the vineyard. So it's in on the can itself. It says it's from the North Coast AVA, and the North Coast AVA is absolutely gigantic. It like swallows up a bunch of other AVAs, and it's just sort of a political boundary more than anything. But this vineyard is near the Delta a little bit in Sassoon, which is it's a pretty flat, hot area inland, but it is near the bay, so it does have some cooling influence, which just means it gets hot as balls during the day, and then it gets windy in the evening and starts to cool down just a little bit, but it's not by any means like cool climate. So like you said, Malvasia does have a tendency to retain a decent amount of acid even in the heat, but this vineyard is just grown on delta sand basically, and it's in a pretty hot area.
Now, I got to spend a week in SLO, and I went as far north as San Francisco and as far south as Santa Barbara because I wanted to go to Satellite. How would that encompass most of that North Coast region? Because that's, even on an interstate, that's almost 4 hours by car end to end. That's an absolutely huge region. Where would you draw the line kind of north to south that you'd call North Coast AVA?
So yeah, the North Coast, I mean, everything above San Francisco basically on the coast. So that's the North Coast. Like California is broken down from like, at the top you have like the North Coast from like Humboldt, Del Norte area.
Oh, okay. I'm entirely wrong about where I thought that was then.
Yeah, I mean like Oregon border, and then I don't think the AVA goes all the way there, but just like as a general rule, North Coast is Oregon border to San Francisco, and then San Francisco down to Santa Barbara basically is the central, like Lompoc would basically be the end of the Central Coast.
Okay.
And as soon as it starts to curve inland and the coast starts facing south, then it's basically what a lot of people consider Southern California. And then basically the AVA just is for the North Coast is all like Sonoma County, I think even part of Napa County, Lake County, and Mendocino. So it's a gigantic area that like pretty much anything can get labeled as North Coast from that. And there's a bunch of smaller AVAs inside of it. But so it can be kind of misleading, because this is really a Delta wine.
Okay. Now this says winemaker Scott Schultz. How do you know Scott? How has he gotten into this program with you?
Just a friend, really, and our, my business partners know him really well. Like our graphic designer has made Scott's labels, or he puts all the final touches on Scott's labels. He's not the artist for them all, but so we've known each other for almost 8 years, I think. I first met Scott when I was an assistant at Tyler, and I met him at IPOB in San Francisco, which was like this Pinot conference basically that used to happen like all over the US, but it doesn't happen anymore. But we were both assistants at the time. He was working for PAX and I was working for Tyler, and I just reached out to him in 2017 when we were doing the companion thing, because I wanted to expand and work with some other people, and he was the first guy we worked with.
How many years have you been doing companion now then?
It started in 2016, so it's still pretty young, but the concept started. We just made Riesling in a can, and we just thought high acid whites in a can would do pretty well, and we kind of just kept it on the white spectrum until this year, or until we made rosé last year.
Yep.
But I think the real fun part about the project is the fact that we do work with other winemakers, and it gives the project a little boost of excitement, because that not only do the wines change every year, but we sometimes, we don't know who's going to be making all the wines from the start either. We don't know exactly what the plan is for 2020 harvest yet. So that part of it makes it kind of fun, and it just ends up in a can, pretty unpretentious. That's kind of the goal, just to get people to get wine wherever glass can't go.
Beautiful. Well, I know the winery itself is just outside of Watsonville, which, wow, that's kind of a long way off the highway and a bit in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I know for the Riesling, at least, you're way down in Santa Barbara County. Where are you right now? You've got a beautiful view behind you that we can all see. I should point out that everyone can see you at home. Brent Rowland from Averill Creek didn't know until almost an hour into the event that people could actually see him at home. So I thought I would just mention that off the hop, that yes, everyone can see you. What are we looking at behind you?
I figured. But yeah, I'm just at home in Aromas, about a mile from the winery. So yeah, we're technically in Watsonville, but closer to the little tiny town of Aromas. And you're right, the Riesling that I get is from Santa Barbara, but also for companion, we get it from Monterey, which is about 30 minutes away. And then the Wirz Vineyard, which is about 30 minutes away as well. So there are some, and in Santa Cruz this year, I finally made a little bit of Riesling from the Peter Martin Ray Vineyard. But we can get into that a little bit later.
Yeah, we were talking about that last summer, about how excited you were about that project.
Yeah.
And you also, you were working on like some vineyards basically kind of just outside the winery door as well. How's that project been coming along?
Outside of the winery, we just have propagated a few different varieties that we're going to be planting outside. We just have Riesling and ferment and harsh Levallois and some Welsh Riesling right now. And the plan is to get some Sylvaner out in the mix. And we're going to plant just 2 acres outside of the winery, which is there's a nice big flat spot that is right above the Pajaro River. And typically it's just been used to farm strawberries and lettuce and things like that. And we're going to be planting that to make sparkling white wine, and just out of a field blend of, Hungarian, Austrian kind of varietals out here. So things that will, produce, high acid grapes and decent yields to make some sparkling wine.
We do quite a brisk business on Hungarian whites made from Welsh Riesling and ferment right now. So I can already feel, at least Devin, the manager of the store here, is probably already rubbing his hands together gleefully, just waiting for your ferment and your Welsh Riesling, because that's exactly the sort of thing he's about. I'm more excited about the Sylvaner, but yeah, that sounds exactly like what we're going to do very, very well with.
Yeah, no, just got to be patient. But that project is really, it's the varieties themselves are super exciting and fun, but the big experiment out there is just going to be grafting the plant material onto native rootstock and doing some trials to see how that does, not just at that site, but just as a rootstock in general. And that project started last year, where we grafted Cabernet onto California native vines, and we planted those out this spring at one of our sites. So it's just a kind of an ongoing rootstock project, and a good excuse to add in, some of those varieties that we don't really have a whole lot of here in California.
That aren't necessarily Riesling,
Yeah, that aren't necessarily Riesling. There's other things that are fun too, as long as you have a healthy amount of Riesling in the mix.
Exactly. I can allow at least one wine in every 12 for me to be something that's not Riesling.
Yeah. I tend to agree with that. It's like 90% of my diet too. So
well, before we dive into the world of Riesling, let's talk about the Savvy Bee, because I think of all the companion wine cans that we have in the store, this has been the fastest seller for us. Has been the Savvy Bee, made by winemaker Gina Hildebrand. Talk about the blend, and talk about, I assume, your friend, maybe your nemesis. I don't know. Maybe things have gone terribly south since 2018. But tell me about Gina. Tell me about the Savvy Bee. Tell me about this wine.
Gina, she's about her own label's called Lady of the Sunshine. I mean, she's happy. She's a bright ray of sunshine all the time. Definitely the opposite of a nemesis. So she's a sweetheart. Married to another great winemaker, Mikey Juni, who owns Scar of the Sea. So they're like the most adorable couple in the entire planet of wine. But the Savvy Bee is from Edna Valley, and in 2018 is basically a blend of, I think, like 75% Sauvignon Blanc from this, it's quasi-famous, called the Oliver's Vineyard, which is part of Tally, but it's in the heart of the Edna Valley. And Gina also farms 7 acres of a biodynamic little vineyard that's within like a quarter mile of Oliver's, and she blended in a little bit of her Chardonnay with the Savvy Bee. So it's kind of like call it like a Chevy, little Chard, little Savvy.
Hey, I'm digging it. I think that, in fact, I can tell you right from our sales numbers that the people who buy our companion wines dig it. It's done very, very well.
For sure.
Sorry?
No, I was going to say, like, it's by far the most popular companion wine, and it's super easy to see why. It's delicious, and it's like, it just tastes like, summertime.
It does.
It's like exuberant Sauvignon Blanc. And for the people who like, who love that, it's like, it just hits the nail on the head. And I mean, the 19 is a little bit different. That's what I'm drinking right now, because I couldn't find one of the 18s. And the 19 does not have any Chardonnay in it. But the 18 is a magical wine. I mean, that wine is seriously good. And I think anyone, who has Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc ought to think about doing some blends between the two, because it does make a outrageously good Sauvignon Blanc.
I'll admit, when I think, Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay mixed together, I'm thinking back to the very early 2000s when Australia was just chucking anything that they could get their hands on in a bottle together. And we had some really bad Sauv Chard blends that they were a hot bloody mess. This is completely different. I don't think I've tasted, at least willingly, a Sauvignon Blanc Chardonnay blend in probably 15 years, at least 10. This is just delightful.
Yeah, no, it's like, exactly, like the whole thing is just a super fun wine. It's so expressive, and I mean, it's obviously bone dry, got awesome acid, and I think, especially for a can of wine, it's really hard to beat. I haven't had a better can of wine than that, to be honest. So, including my own that I make. So it's just like, it's a real winner. We just can't make that much of it, because it is, like I said, it's from some biodynamic grapes, only an acre of Chardonnay that Gina farms, and she, put some of it into that blend with the Sauvignon Blanc, which is, kind of amazing. So it's like a really well-made wine. It just happens to be in a can.
Yeah, I've been very much on like team wine in a can, not the god awful $3 stuff, because there's so much of that out there. Oh, look, we have a Pinot Grigio for $3 in a can.
Yeah,
good for you. I'm so happy for you.
No, for sure. It's like, if you want to drink good wine, like all of us do. There is a time and place, like, where you do need to have a can. Like last weekend, I went fishing for, we had our, Memorial Day holiday, and it was quite hot here, and we took a boat out, and that was like the perfect time to have cans of wine. And, I don't want to be drinking shit wine in a can.
No. No, I think our entire canned wine selection are either companion or the Ferdinand wines. Or
those are great.
We get lights in cans, and it's a
sweet.
Riesling in a can. How am I going to say no to that? Obviously.
I know. I didn't know Josie Lights did that. What a legend.
Yeah, he puts his lights out in a can. It's a little 250 ml like tall can. It's really slick. I take those out a little more often than I probably should. I absolutely love them.
That sounds like a fucking winner too. I haven't seen those yet in the U.S., but I'm sure they're around. I just haven't They're definitely not in Aromas. I can tell you that.
That's fair. How many people live in Aromas?
We got I think 2,200. We just did our census, so we'll see how many people actually are here. But it's a tiny little town. There's not even a stoplight or anything, which is pretty rare for coastal. I consider it coastal California because we're only 9 miles from the ocean.
Beautiful.
So.
As I expected, Devin is all on board with the Ferment and Welsh Riesling and Sylvaner being part of the vineyard. He's right on board. I think within seconds of me saying, "Oh yeah, that's gonna be Devin's thing," he'd already gotten on board with that. Craig asks, "Does the grafting quicken the production of grapes suitable for making wine?" I apologize. This is a few minutes ago back. I wanted to let you go on about this because you were nailing a lot of excellent points. So we're a little behind on the comments. So
no worries.
Hailing back to your comment about grafting, Craig wants to know about grafting.
No is the answer. I mean, as a general rule, grafting anything kind of retards or slows the growth. So anything that's own rooted will be usually way more vigorous and productive than anything that is grafted. And further from that, anything that's propagated from seed will usually be way more vigorous than any cutting. So it each step of the way that you either graft or do own rooted or versus a seed of any plant in general, you're slowing down the growth. The best plants in general are grown from seed, but in a production environment, that's totally non-viable because you have no idea what the genetics are going to be. And, I mean, you could end up with a zillion different varieties if you planted any fruit from seed. It doesn't really matter what it is. There's going to be wide differences, and you don't know when things are going to fruit and be productive. So everyone does cuttings. Typically, people do grafted cuttings because of phylloxera. So anywhere that you're not on super sandy soils, you're going to be doing, you're going to graft the vines. And as a general rule, things are a little bit slower to grow, but there are rootstocks that can stimulate, more vigor than other ones. And that's one thing that people do consider for rootstocks, but typically it comes down to, the soil type that you have. So mapping out the blocks that you're going to plant and trying to find a rootstock that's going to match the conditions that you have. And what we're doing with the native grapes is trying to compile basically a library of cuttings from different soil types of the native vines within California. So we're collecting specimens from a bunch of different counties, from up north, inland, down south, to get a diversity of selections and trying to see which ones perform well in each different environment. So the whole trial will be to find good Vitis californica rootstocks, and specifically from wild vines that have qualities that we want to match to each soil type, whether it's drought tolerance or clay soils or high magnesium soils or maybe salty soils.
I'm going to cut in with a question here. So most people here are familiar with Vitis vinifera. We actually talked a little bit about Vitis labrusca because we had Brett Rowland on from Averill Creek, and he's a big Marichal Foch guy. I apologize to everyone if you're hearing things get... No? Okay. I can hear some computer noises. We're having some camera issues on the side, but we're fine. But yeah, tell us about Vitis californicus?
Yeah, it's just called Vitis californica. So it's just one of the native grapes to California. It does produce its own fruit. It's not used in any production ag. It's not used as rootstock. It's used as an ornamental plant, and there's a natural hybrid between Alicante, Boucher, and Vitis californica that is used as an ornamental throughout California because it gets a deep red fall color. And in California we don't have a lot of deciduous plants that get those fall colors. So some people do plant it just literally to get fall color around their house, and that's really the only use for it. But it's something that it kind of just makes sense to me, because all rootstock around the world is Native American roots. All Native American grapes are resistant to phylloxera. None of them are immune, but they all have varying levels of resistance. And basically, American grapes were brought over to Europe in the 1800s, and that's how phylloxera was spread. And phylloxera is a little root louse, so it's an insect that feeds on vine roots and spreads a. I'm gonna sound like a total idiot, but I forgot if it's a virus or not, or bacteria. But
I believe it's a bacterium with phylloxera. So phylloxera itself is a flatworm or nematode. It's got a really complex life cycle, very similar
it's
to
actually
an aphid.
a louse. I do know that much. It's a louse.
Okay.
So it's just like it's like lice, and you can see them in certain soil types if you pull them up, and you can see them like feeding on vine roots, and they can cause like galls and other things on the leaves. But it's something that you don't really encounter a whole lot because most people plant on rootstock nowadays. Almost everywhere. There's very few vineyards that go in unrooted.
Yeah, some of the old Australian stuff, lots of South America where they have those super dry volcanic soils where phylloxera can't make it. There's places where they don't have to, but yeah, by and large, everybody's on American rootstocks these days.
Yeah.
All right, let's move into A, the more Riesling portion of the evening, and B, the wines you made. So for me, the most interesting part of the day. So yeah, let's. Do you want to start with the rosé, or do you want to start with the white Riesling?
Well, let's do the Aeolian, because that's you guys have the 18.
We do. We have the 18 Aeolian.
That's perfect. I unfortunately don't have a bottle of that with me. My warehouse had 5 cases supposedly earlier this week, and that was just an error. There's 0.
We have that. I spent 3 hours earlier this week tracking down 2 kegs, and at the end of it, it turns out I double entered a damn invoice. So yeah, it happens.
Yeah, sometimes things disappear, but it's all good. So the Aeolian, that is, man, what do I want to say about this wine that I want to admit? It's a wine that was born out of logistics. So I make the majority of my Rieslings in stainless steel, and this was born out of like a lack of tank space, basically. And I ended up fermenting and aging a portion of Kick-On in barrel one year, and we typically just don't sulfur very early, and it was tasting pretty good, and we bottled it without sulfur, just straight out of the barrel. And it was not all that great at first, and I kind of thought like screwed the pooch, but eventually the wine kind of came around and a new style of Riesling came to be. And it's just I think the best way to describe it would be like a hybrid between I don't even know, like old school dry Mosel Riesling and a Jura white, if that makes any sense, because it is quite a salty, oxidative, but still reductive wine.
I'm right there with you. It also tastes like well-salted lemon meringue pie, which I'm all about.
Totally. And it's just like the oxidation that you get with not using any sulfur gives it that salty character without having, sometimes like wines can get saltiness from sulfur, which is easy to understand like why that can be, because sulfur is basically a salt. But in the way that this is made, it's oxidative because it doesn't have any sulfur, but it is topped up, so it is still tense, and it typically gets bottled with a gram of sugar, and so it'll finish fermentation and bottle, and get
And
a
yet,
little.
no pétillance, at least on the bottle that I have. There was a touch of sparkle on the two companion ones, but not on this. This is
Yeah,
still.
it's not perceptible, but there's like it's a very very small amount. And what that does is, as the wine is bottled, you have like a small death, because the bottling process is like quite oxidative. You're moving the wine from a vessel into bottle, and when that happens, you get a lot of oxygen to like pick up in the wine, so you have like a little bit more dissolved oxygen than you want. And as that gram of sugar finishes fermentation and bottle, like you don't develop enough CO2 to have any like perceptible effervescence, but it's enough to keep things a little bit reductive, especially when it's in a screw cap. So there's nowhere for that gas to go. So the wine is both reductive and oxidative, and kind of, I just call it redox, because that's the best way to describe it. You have simultaneously both those reactions going on, and that's what keeps it alive and focused, is the fact that it does get bottled with a little bit of life in it, and that CO2 that is produced keeps it fresh. That's kind of the magic behind it.
All right, I'm going to get to a couple of questions that have come up in the comments here. I'm actually going to open with one of my own. Sorry, comment section. It's my show. I get to open with a question. We have, over the last 10 weeks, kind of brushed up against and teased the idea of reductive versus oxidative winemaking, but I don't think anybody's given us a real good explanation of what the two terms mean. And because it keeps coming up, would you kind of let everybody know and what your view is on what the two terms mean and how they're used in winemaking?
Yeah, absolutely. So oxidation, there's several different ways to play with oxidation, one of which is aging wine in barrel, because you have aging stuff in wood, you have micropore space, so you have always a little bit of oxygen transgression by aging anything in a barrel. Your topping regimen, how long you wait in between, and topping is just filling the wine in a barrel all the way to the top, just so you don't have any headspace or oxygen. And the more headspace you have, the more oxidation that you can have, possibly because you have more surface area exposed to air. So like your topping regimen has a play in that. And then at crush, what is your exposure to oxygen? Like, for a lot of people, will make white wines pretty safe prophylactically. They'll add sulfur to the fruit right at crush and use anti-oxidative gases like carbon dioxide, or usually not argon at crush, but carbon dioxide is pretty commonly used to keep oxidation from taking place. So at each stage you have a chance to play with oxidation or reduction, which is just the opposite. So
if you're making a wine oxidatively or aerobically, you're introducing oxygen, you're allowing that to change the wine in a perceptible way that will create reliable, perceptible characters of a wine that has seen oxygen. Whereas if you're making it reductively, you're making it effectively anaerobically or without oxygen, and you're counting on certain characteristics that'll pop up that way.
Absolutely. And, to be honest, like you could do reductive winemaking in barrel and in tank, but they're just different. You get different results because each vessel reacts differently. So literally at each step of the process, you have decisions to make, whether you're going to do things aerobically or anaerobically. In regards to just moving the juice from barrel to tank, or tank to barrel, or tank to bottle, or barrel to bottle, or juice pan to tank or to barrel. It's like each step you have decisions to make how you want to handle the juice, and it comes down to obviously style of wine that you want to make, and more importantly, during fermentation you might have fermentation that is taken off and gets reductive because it's really like cranking hard, and you might need to add some air to it to keep it from stinking so bad because it is getting reductive.
Now, when we talk
So,
about that reductive aroma, is that the just kind of because you're making it in a sealed tank, when you're making it where it can't really vent any gases particularly, when we get that kind of funky reductive aroma, where's that coming out? Is it just fermentation gases that are trapped because you're not making it in the presence of oxygen? It can't vent those off?
well, it's just, I mean, it's, think about oxygen and carbon dioxide. So it's literally, adding a carbon onto the oxygen changes the whole equation, because carbon dioxide is what makes things reductive. So when yeast are really cranking during a fermentation, like at the height of fermentation, you're producing a lot of CO2, which is just one of the waste products of yeast, and that's the primary driver into keeping things reductive. There are some other components that are produced that will make things stink, and that's like what we call like real reduction. But as a general rule, like if when you have an accumulation of carbon dioxide, the stage is set to get things into that reductive phase, because you don't have any you have a lot less oxygen, free oxygen present, if that makes sense.
And then that once it's exposed to oxygen, some of that reductive aroma will blow off. So if somebody gets a bottle of wine and they open it and they find it very reductive and a little bit kind of reductive, stinky, just walk away, give it 20 minutes, it'll blow off.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. I mean, it depends what kind of reduction you have and how bad it is and how ingrained in the wine it is. Like, if you don't address things during fermentation and something is like really reductive for even a couple of days, and that's basically a sign to you as a winemaker that the yeast is stressed out. Either it's fermenting way too fast or way too slow. Because if it's struggling, that's when really bad reduction happens. So you can have it from both ways. You're really just trying to aim the ship, which is the fermentation, in the direction of just being healthy first. And at least that's what I do. And stylistically has to go along with it, but you don't want to make sure that you cross the line over into the gnarly reduction or gnarly oxidative on either side, basically. But they're the two opposites from each other.
I'll get to some of the earlier questions in a minute. I just jumped to the bottom just to keep current. But Becky asks, a prophylactic wine? What do you mean by that?
Just basically, it's not a prophylactic wine. I was referring to how some wineries or winemakers will prophylactically add sulfur or use CO2 to juice,
So going back to the original root of the word is as a preventative.
Yeah, it's just like, I would say the majority of wineries in the world, when you get fruit coming in the door, will just add at least a little bit of sulfur to really suppress any bacterial or microbial growth that would be harmful. And most commercial yeast and even native yeast can handle a nice wallop of sulfur and do just fine. So most people will just add a good bit just right in the door just to suppress any negative bacteria.
Beautiful. Deirdre asks, does bottle shape influence wines? I noticed that Rieslings are very often in this type of bottle. Do you want to talk about how much is tradition and bullshit, and if bottle shape really does influence the wine at all?
That's a great question. The bottle shape influencing wine is way beyond my pay grade. So the
guy who owns a winery. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I don't really know. I do some side-by-side trials with, we bottle about a case of all the canned wines that we do every year. Except I forgot to do that this year. I just reminded myself. But to be honest, no idea if it does influence anything or not. But the story behind the Hock bottle shape is I think it just had to do with logistics, in the Mosel River, basically. So it wasn't just Riesling that was bottled that way, but I think a lot of wines made in the Mosel were just bottled with that shape bottle, because there used to be a shitload other varieties that were planted out there, And it was, I guess the reason being they used to lay the bottles on their side, and they didn't need a big punt, because if you notice, a lot of we call, in English we call them hock bottles for the Riesling shape, and they don't have a big punt, which is, this is the punt where you can, my fingers going in, but Riesling bottles are pretty flat on the bottom and tall and slender. But nowadays I think it's just used to identify the variety more than anything else. Whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't really know, but it at this point it's just tradition, and that's really what it is. More than anything else.
Ryan, I'm actually going to take my usual about this time intermission to use the restroom here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you to talk to folks a little bit about your winemaking history, where you got started in the wine industry, and kind of what your winemaking philosophy to this point is. And I will join you again in about 2 minutes.
Yeah. No. Great question. So basically, I got a degree from a university in San Luis Obispo, which is in Central California. They had a kind of a fledgling wine program at the time, and I just thought, as an 18-year-old, like that sounded like a pretty fun thing to study. But I went to college to wrestle, and I had a few friends who were also in the program, so I had a couple of good reasons to join and sign up. And I stopped wrestling after a couple of years because I got really into viticulture. And then towards the end of college, after working a couple internships for some bigger vineyard operations, I just didn't think I wanted to pursue that exact path, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I met Justin Willett, who is the winemaker and owner of Tyler Winery, and I met him rock climbing in Santa Barbara County, in this pretty remote spot, and I ended up working for him for 4 years, and that's where I started making my wine, because he had a sweet big winery that we had just moved into, and there was a hell of a lot of good Riesling available in Santa Barbara, and specifically at one vineyard called Kick On, and somebody who became a good friend of mine. I wouldn't call him a mentor per se, but we've done the same path, and that's Graham Titomer, who made the lovely Gruner in a can. But he was a big inspiration for me to really pursue the Riesling thing, and I just found the variety interesting as I started drinking and getting into wine myself, just working at Tyler. Because I guess I'll back up. Like, I really was not into wine in school, because we just never got exposed to the wine drinking culture. We would just drink bag wine and get drunk in college. So it was not really
we
like,
all did that in college, to be fair.
Yeah, of course. And even in the viticulture program, it's like beer, and bags of wine, slapping the goonie sack was just like the thing what we did. So
I know what that means, but do you want to elucidate slapping the goonie sack?
Yeah, no, and it's just like that was, I just, at that point, like, I had, not like a giant interest until I started working for somebody who was at Justin Willett, who was just really into wine. Like, somebody who did not come from a educational background, and he just liked wine to begin with. And I really learned to appreciate wine with him, because he was making Pinot Chard, and we started drinking a lot of Burgundy. And then he introduced me to Riesling, and eventually I left and did 2 different stints while I was working for him. But I went and worked in Australia, and I got pretty excited just drinking Australian Rieslings. They're cheap, crisp, no frills, and probably the best, depending on who you ask. But I think the Rieslings out of Australia are the best white wines.
I entirely agree with you, yes. The
Yeah.
only thing I would say is there's some new Sauvignons that we're starting to get out of there that are pretty top class.
Yeah, that's true. Things are changing quick.
Yeah, they really are.
But like the Aussies, like, they make a unabashedly rigid bracing style of Riesling in a hot climate, and like most people do a pretty damn good job, even from machine pick stuff. And I just got a little bit more intrigued with the grape from that. And then after just doing a couple of vintages, I reached out to another friend of mine who's an importer, and he set me up working with a winery in Austria called Tegernsehof. And coincidentally, Graham Titomer just worked across the street in the same village at Knoll. So it was it's a bit of a Riesling mecca there. You know, there's a good bit of tradition in the Wachau. And I really learned about like just Riesling and like style. I mean, more than anything else, and learned how to use stainless steel when I was there. And that was like the big takeaway: how to play with Riesling juice and how to build a good juice. Picking Riesling at different ripeness levels and using oxidation and reduction in different ways with stainless steel. So like Tegernsehof, if you've never had the wines and you know you have no preconceived notions about farming or anything, like stylistically the wines are superb and probably like, you know, by far my favorite style of Wachau Riesling. But he's a, you know, master technician in using oxidation on juice and reduction in Riesling in tank, and using malolactic fermentation in Riesling, which is pretty uncommon.
Yeah, it's not usual, but it does create a really unique, like fuller, richer experience. And I think your idea of saying this is kind of like hot climate Mosel crossed with Jura is pretty apt. I really love this.
Yeah, no, and because you have, it's a natty wine in a lot of senses, but it has what I was going for with the style there is it's kind of like a overstatement on the, you know, the saltiness of the ocean, because like Kick-On Vineyard is within 10 miles of the Pacific as the crow flies on a sand dune, and
you definitely get the salt.
Yeah, and it's like stylistically you have, you know, like I can influence that character, and it's like, to me that is, you know, making a wine with a sense of place, because you're stylistically like tailoring it to have, you know, more of a pronounced like version of that. And I think that's where like natural wine should be aiming, is really at specific styles that give people a feeling of a sense of place, instead of just like saying this is what it is. You know, it really comes down to like, you know, how chefs kind of create that feeling with certain dishes using certain ingredients. That's really what it's about, is you're creating that experience for somebody else through the style of wine that you're making. And that's what I do like about making the Aeolian, because it does have like enhanced saltiness, and it does taste like an oceanic wine, and that's what makes it cool.
I've got a question. Exactly how many roosters do you own?
Oh, you hear those in the background?
We have had a few comments, yes.
Those are just all the neighbors. I own 0. I have 2 cats, but Aromas is a nice little country town. It's, you know, right on the cusp of being like in California's funny. It's like you go even a little bit inland, it feels like a red state, and like we're right on the dividing line between, you know, the extreme liberalness of Santa Cruz and inland, and it's also farm country. So it
definitely is. Yeah, that was quite a ways off the highway, and it felt a long ways off the highway. To a certain point, if you told me I was in kind of rural Montana, I wouldn't have been wildly shocked.
No,
it looks much the same except for the grapevines.
Yeah, no,
and there aren't quite as many Bud Light cans in the ditches. There's still some, but not as many.
More Modelo.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's I think like style, like wine style, is something that gets like pretty overlooked a lot of times, and it's something that I really, you know, like to focus on for every single wine that I make, because it does tend to evolve a little bit every year. And some, like, honestly, like some, like the Aeolian, like I did not set out necessarily to make that. It was a wine based out of logistics, and it turned out to have characteristics that I really liked. And like I just like have started to like refine that style like a little bit more every year to get it closer to like what I want. But often some of the things that you think as like not mistakes but logistical challenges in the cellar turn out to be like your best and brightest experiments, and you learn to like refine those year after year to kind of find an aim for hitting that like stylistic note that you want, and obviously like each vintage things can change like drastically, like numbers wise, and fermentations might not cooperate. So there's always experimentation going on and things that you're learning, but having that stylistic plan is like probably the most important part of winemaking, to be honest. I think
it's adapting to the crop, to the individual vintage conditions, and not forcing it to be what you envisioned at the start of the year.
Yeah, it's like for instance, like my 2019 Wirz Riesling. I have 3 different tanks of that were picked at different levels, and one of them's dry, and 2 of them are still like actively fermenting. And I don't know when I'm going to be bottling that necessarily, and that kind of,
the wine is going to tell you when you're bottling it.
Totally. And it's like I've never had to like delay bottling it, because I usually bottle all the whites within like 9 or 10 months after harvest, and that might just need to sit in tank an extra 6 months. And not that that's a bad thing, but it like that's something that just might happen because the fermentation's not done, and there's all sorts of tools that we could use to speed that process up, but at the same time it might yield some better results to see if longer aging does enhance the wine also. Maybe an extra 6 months in tank is going to be a real benefit to the Wirz Riesling program. I just don't know.
All right, well, we are going to jump in with 3 quick points here. First off, people are now using the rooster as a drinking game, which I highly encourage. Second, I'm going to talk about our next 2 tasting events. This coming Wednesday, we are doing, along with our Friday night wine tastings, we are doing a Wednesday night craft beer tasting. And we've worked with quite a few of the Alberta craft beer breweries. We've worked with Blind Men Brewing, we've worked with Establishment, we've worked with 88, and they've all done an incredible job. This week, coming up this Wednesday, we're going to work with 88's next door neighbor. We're going to work with Annex, and we're going to do every beer style you like as long as it's a pale ale. So we have their Forward Progress Pale Ale, their Meats and Bounds Extra Pale Ale, their Force Majeure New England Pale Ale, and finally the King's English Black Tea and Lemon Pale Ale. We are still efforting getting somebody from Annex to join us, but I'm about 85% confident that we're going to have somebody from the brewery to come and hang out with us. Annex has been around quite a bit longer than any of the other breweries, other than maybe Blind Man, that we've focused on. In terms of what we now reference as the Calgary Barley Belt, they're a bit of a founder. With Annex, we're right back to the usual price that we've been doing to this point at $20 a 4-pack. Last week, I know we did 24 because we had that lambic in there, but we're right back to $20 a 4-pack on this one. For wines next week, well, we're doing that thing that I've been avoiding, because once we get down into this rabbit hole, we're not going to get out for a while. We are dipping our toe into France, and Lord help us, this is a subject that we could go on for the next 5 years about and never really be done. We are going to start in France, and we are going to do a couple of different regions. Now, we are not going to do particularly major regions. We are going to do a couple of the smaller ones. Because we had such an amazing response to our Malbec event with Mauro and Marcello from Finca Trapezio in Argentina, we're going to start with Malbec because Malbec is fun. We're going to do the Godu 100% Malbec Rosé, and then we're going to do their Cahors at 85% Malbec and 15% Merlot. I know when we talk about Malbec from like a French perspective, we always open with Bordeaux, and we talk about, Malbec being the thing that ripens when Cabernet Sauvignon doesn't. Tosh. It's all a bunch of bloody tosh. Where Malbec's actually most important in France tends to be from Cahors, where it is the major red grape. And we're going to taste a rosé and a red wine from them. And then we are going to dip our toes into the Loire Valley. Now, we could do a 2-month series on the Loire Valley, but we are going to start with a white based in Chenin Blanc and with a rosé based in Cabernet Franc. We've actually carried this rosé before. I should say none of these wineries are actually strangers to the store. We've been carrying the less expensive red from Domaine Godou for a while. But from La Noble, we have their Chinon Rosé and we have their Chenin Blanc. So these are going to be really, really fun. Nicole from Novos Wines is very, very camera shy, but I'm hoping that she will join us. If she does or if she doesn't, it's going to be a spectacular event either way. And I hope you'll join us. Opening Pandora's box, a can of worms, a little bit of a topic I'm never going to be able to put to bed again, which is why we haven't done France yet. Once you dip your toe in those waters, it's a long road, because France is to a point a topic that never really gets tired, because every time you think you're done, there's 5 more regions you haven't talked about yet. So that's our next couple of wine tastings. Let's finish off here with the Aeolian Riesling, and feel free to criticize our choice of regions, because it's a strange one. If I was going to jump in on France, starting with Chinon and Cahors is a bit of an odd one, but it's going to be fun anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you should explore those regions. Nobody else is,
I wouldn't say nobody else is. I mean, one of the things that happened when COVID hit here is we noticed that our sales went up quite a bit, but our average bottle price went down. Are we still selling stuff at $50 a bottle and above? Yes, in a blue bloody moon, occasionally we are. But one of the big things that jumped was our sub $20 a bottle wine sales, and having things like this Côte de Lot Malbec from Godou, it was an absolute godsend for us. We sold buckets and buckets and buckets of it over the last couple of months. Having that ability to have really, really top class, interesting stuff under 20, which is also where the companion wines come really in handy, is getting something interesting and exciting, and not just corporated to death, where it's gone through 6 focus groups who all told them it needed to be sweeter and oakier before it finally made it to the damn customer. Having something actually with a soul at this price point is so nice, and this winery is something we've worked with quite a bit. So I'm really excited for having, Chinon and Cahors. They're not exactly Bordeaux and Burgundy, but they're not priced like it either. So I'm very excited about this.
Those are the staples that keep the world spinning, to be honest. And that's what most people can drink and afford, like me included, and that's why they're so important in a lot of ways, just 'cause that's what most people are drinking.
Well, let's jump into the rosé, which I'm really excited about, because I believe this is the rosé that I got to try for the first time when I was actually at your winery, the 2018 vintage.
Yeah, no, you got it, I think, definitely before it's released, because it's weird, because this is a fall release wine. Most people are releasing rosé in the spring, and just based on logistics every year, I like to give the wines a little bit more time. And this is a wine based on Riesling, so it is a slow, long fermentation, and it was just not ready to go, because this is unfiltered, and it was, if I released this in the spring, it'd be a turbid milkshake. Unless I wanted to, filter it and just slam it in the bottle before it was ready, basically. So this is a rosé made in the slow way and released at the wrong time, made from Riesling and a little bit of Zinfandel. It's from one of the oldest Riesling vineyards still in production in North America, from the Wirz vineyard, and which was planted in 1964, and Zinfandel from there that was planted in 1902, and a little bit of Zin was planted after that in the 20s and in the 40s. So it's not just all 120-year-old Zin, but basically the recipe is pretty simple. It's 97% Riesling and 3% Zin, and it's just to add a little bit of color to the wine.
Now, this is something that we had this conversation, and I found it interesting enough. I want to rehash it. Is it only 3% Zinfandel? We shouldn't pick up a lot of red berry on this. It shouldn't be a major flavor component. But as we discussed, it has a real, at least to me, like bright red berry component. Which is that just the color throwing me? Is that something that Riesling could give us anyway? Is that just my mind playing tricks because I see the pink color, or even at just 3% concentration, is the Zin capable of throwing that much red berry that it's so perceptible?
I want to say a little bit of all of the above, because it's a mind fuck as much as it is. Well, it's a mind fuck. Even that a little bit of Zin can make that much of a difference, to be honest. And it's not just the color, because you do have exuberant fruitiness that you get from the Zin, and honestly, the Zin has more acid than the Riesling from this vineyard.
Really? Tell me about that. That sounds insane, because I think about Zin, and I know that traditionally Zin, when it was grown in Italy as Primitivo, it came from Puglia, and it was sticking out in this giant peninsula into the middle of the Mediterranean. It was getting absolutely cooked by the sun. It has to be a high acid grape, but I don't think of American Zin as a high acid grape. So tell me about this high acid Zin.
I think part of it's the site and the practices. So the Wirz vineyard is unique. It's super hot, but it's also coastal. So you get really big diurnal swings every day, but it's all planted on limestone, an old limestone called calcite. It's all dry farmed, and those two things really influence how the acid's going to be in a wine. Anytime you're irrigating, not anytime you're irrigating, but as a general rule, when you irrigate, you tend to get bigger yields, and the more water you add in, the more water that the berries do retain, and water has a pH of 7, and so basically you're just watering down the acid, and that is something in a hot climate that you really need to think about, is the balance between acid and sugar in the grapes, because that's our biggest battle, is not getting things ripe. It's even in the worst vintage, I never think about getting things ripe enough. That's never a problem.
You have all the hours of daylight that you could possibly ask for.
I mean, yeah. In 2018, we picked some Riesling at the end of October that was not ultra ripe, but there's never a chance that your grapes are never going to be underripe unless the crop is insanely gigantic, and that's a bad management practice. But dry farm grapes on limestone soils. Limestone is a high pH soil, and you usually have that inverse relationship when vines are planted on high pH, and you typically have higher acids. So, and Zin, believe it or not, is a pretty high acid variety. Even when it's picked pretty ripe, they can have really high acid, depending on the site and the climate and the vintage. But it's not uncommon for even super hot vineyards to have Zin with a pH of 3.0 or 3.1 and potential alcohol of 15 or 16.
That's madness.
I know it is madness, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. But and it's not every year at Wirz that the Zin has higher acid than the Riesling either. It's but generally it's picked earlier with higher sugar and higher acid than the Riesling. And honestly, it was just the rosé came to be just because I was tasting a lot of wines in the cellar. I had some Zin in my glass, and I went to try one of the Riesling tanks, and it just made rosé in the glass, and I was like, this is great. it's dumb if I don't make it. And it turned out that a lot of people liked it, because Riesling and Zen, it's compared to a lot of other rosés that people make in California, like this has a lot more acid, flavor, texture, you name it, because we're not making it just with direct press Pinot or Grenache or something like that. We're able to build a better juice basically with the different.
I think when people come in, maybe not with the folks in the chat, but I think a lot of people are now at this point, since the new vintage showed up for us, I think in February or March of the Stirm Rosé. I think people at this point are just downright tired of saying, "Hey, what's great in rosé?" and me and Devin putting this wine in their hands and being like this, and like, but you recommended this last time. Yeah, buy it again.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's just like the fact that it's made mostly out of Riesling, I think brings like, the point that we were talking about earlier, that there's no better value in California wine than Riesling by a mile. Like there's no grape that costs less to buy than Riesling, because it's so unpopular down here that like it does give you the freedom to experiment quite a bit more. But the other thing is like, yeah, I say unpopular. It's got so many fans as well that people like forget to talk about. But it has its place.
Yeah,
But
Riesling nerds tend to stick together. It's a club.
It is. We do tend to stick together, and it is like a little community. But maybe that's the great thing about it, is like it's so underappreciated that you get the flexibility to be able to experiment like more than I ever thought possible with it. And that's continuing to be the case. Like we haven't even delved into making any sparkling Riesling yet.
And you do have that beautiful sparkling Albarino that I love so very much. Yeah,
no, that's exactly the thing. It's like there's so stylistic in diversity keeps it pretty interesting.
So I'm going to use that as a bit of a segue. So speaking of perhaps underrated grapes, I'm going to be very cheeky and say we got a little bit of the Pais this year. We only got a case.
Oh yeah.
But you only made like 350 bottles of this stuff. But we managed to get ourselves 12. It's not on the shelves yet. It's coming. I apparently have permission to talk about this.
Yeah.
Why don't we discuss it a little bit? What is Pais? Why is it so exciting? Why is it that I'm only getting 12? And why are you so fascinated with the grape?
It's from the same vineyard. So it's from the Wirz vineyard, which has the old Riesling and Zen. It's just, what does it represent? It's the first variety known to have been planted in California, and it was first planted in Baja, California, while all of Baja and all of California was still part of Mexico, and actually part of Spain, and then became part of Mexico, and then California. But it has a history dating back to the Spanish missionaries here who planted it, and so like it's really a shit grape. And the story that I've heard is that like the Spanish king just wanted to become like a dog of a grape.
I'm going to just cut it for 1 sec. Jeremy, I won't deny that Friday's tasting has gone off the rails, but this time alone, it's not my fault.
No,
it's been my fault many times, but tonight it is not. But no, we've had some people saying, yeah, the colorful language is fine. So yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's a heavy producer. It does well in the heat. It survived, and it just lives forever. But it's a really challenging grape to work with in the winery. It's and in the vineyard. I feel like Pat Wirz, who owns and farms the Wirz vineyard, he says, if you sneeze on it, it's going to get rot. And, it's kind of true, because it's almost like a table grape. It's really low in acid, big berries. It looks like Grenache, on steroids. And like the old vines get huge. I've never seen a vine put on more wood than Pais. And the one we make is actually genetically different than Pais. It's called Rosa del Peru, but it pretty much looks like the same damn thing, just like a little bit darker. And
that's always the knock I've heard against Pais, is it's so incredibly vigorous. It's all about the green growth. It's much happier to give you 10 tons of green growth and leaves and stems and everything else than it is to give you like half a ton of grapes.
Yeah,
and it takes about 100 years for it to actually, start behaving itself.
Yeah, and it's, there are older vines of, Mission Pais in California than anything else. And it's withstood the test of time, but it's starting to gain a footing just kind of as a novelty, I think, more than anything else. And I used to, well, actually, these grapes, the stuff that I get from Pat Wirz, used to just get blended in with all the other Zen. And in 2018 was the first time that it was just separated out and we got enough to just make a barrel of it. So that was the first year I got to work with it. It's challenging. I still don't really know the style of wine I want to make with it, because it's so different than everything else I do, because it's low acid, really high sugar, and it's kind of way out of my ballpark. I just don't have the experience with anything like that. I've never made Grenache, and a lot of Spanish grapes. It's which is kind of the fun part, to be honest, because I don't really know what I want to do to change it yet. Still, after 2 years, but it's cool because of the history. Even though it's like I said, it is a shit grape through and through for making wine. But that's part of the challenge, is like, can we make something really delicious out of this instead of just like a simple glue wine that just has novelty on its own because it's from a weird variety. And
just how amazing a silk purse can you make from the Sauzir sort of idea. Yeah, I do.
Totally. Exactly. So it's it has intrigue because it's got a challenge, and that's kind of what I like. But yeah, I'm excited for you to get that. The 2019 version is a little bit more precise, but it's super similar, to be honest.
We don't have a lot of questions coming in. We have some love. Grant says both the Stirms are spectacular, and he's a Malbec guy. Craig tells us that he can't really say if he's ever had a nicer rosé, and that they're usually nonsense. And I know that you are, to a certain point, behind both, but I think virtually all of the wines have been basically, people rank them at the end. It's nothing we necessarily encourage, but it's not something we stop either. The almost universal has been 4, 3, and then these two in some order. People are absolutely loving your work, as do I, obviously. That's why I came out all the way and saw you and hung out and was like, hi, I'm this random Riesling from Canada you've never met before. Can I be your best friend?
Hey, you know what, though? Aromas is just as much off, the beaten path for somebody from Lethbridge as Lethbridge is for somebody coming from California. So, I didn't get to go to Lethbridge last time. When I was there last year, we only went around in Calgary and Edmonton. So I still have some exploring to do in Alberta.
We have more than one stoplight, I promise. It's
yeah.
And you know what? If you can't make it down here, I'll come see you in Calgary, because it's been a lot of fun. The Hand agrees, his favorite Riesling ever. So, we're really, really glad you could join us. Let's see if there's any last questions that are coming in here. Let's see if there's anything really exciting. Sorry if I do miss your comments. The more the tasting goes off the rails, the better. Thank you. Hey, I tend to agree, but I'm trying to maintain some level of, still being able to be on YouTube here.
At least we're not talking politics or anything.
Oh no, no, that is strongly discouraged. We don't really talk about the pandemic. We mostly just talk about wine and how things are with you. And I'm honestly absolutely staggered that when you mentioned you had cats, no one asked to see your cats. Because a winemaker had a dog a few weeks ago, and it was all we could talk about for 20 minutes. It was great.
No, yeah, I'm like one of the few without a dog. That'll probably change at some point, but cats are actually a lot more ideal for a winemaker because I don't have to deal with a dog getting into trouble when I'm working out in a vineyard or on a tractor or anything like that. But I do miss the companionship of a dog, so I guess maybe I am missing out. But I think I'm gonna go because I got dinner on the stove.
Nope, I was just about to say the good nights. I was checking for any last minute questions, which we don't really have. So yeah, we've got some more love, especially for the last winemaker's dog. Thank you again. But thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us. This is about when you're actually about 10 minutes past when I usually let the winemakers go, but you had so many incredible analogies and stories to talk about with your wines. I couldn't slow you down. I didn't want to, and I, in good faith, couldn't. It was just too much fun.
Well, dude, I'm stoked to be on, and I'm glad people were tuning in and engaging. It's like this new normal is going to be a lot more normal than we think for probably a long time, and I'm excited that people actually wanted to spend some time with me on a Friday night to learn a little bit. So, thanks for having me, and I'm stoked to talk about everything we have going on.
My wife has one more site conference she has to attend, and one of the sites is in Slow. So, if that's where we end up going, I'll be back, and you'll have trouble getting me off your porch again.
Good. You get to stay in Aromas maybe next time with the rooster.
Yeah, with the roosters. I can't wait. Thank you very much, Ron. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Take it easy.
Good night.
All right, good night.
Take care. All right. So that was Ryan Strim of Stirm Wine Co. Companion Wine Company. Thank you again for Ryan joining us. That was just so much fun. I tried not to go too much of a giant fanboy on him because I am a huge fan. We did whites and a little bit of orange with Malvasia. We didn't even touch on the fact that the Malvasia sees a bit of skin contact. We just kind of glossed right by that because there was so much to talk about. I hope you all had as much fun as I did. We will see you all again for Annex beer tasting this Wednesday, or we will see you this Friday for our dip into France, our very first toe in the water with Cahors and with the Loire Valley region of Chinon. For Andrew Hilton Wine and Spirits, my name is Kyle. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a wonderful Friday night and a bright and beautiful 30-degree above Saturday tomorrow. Cheers. Bye.